Well, hi, and thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast today on browser-based 3270 terminal emulation, a tale of two architectures. Let me tell you a little bit about Software Diversified Services. SDS is a global leader in mainframe software and has been named to the Cybersecurity 500 list of the world's hottest and most innovative cybersecurity companies for second quarter of 2017. Founded in 1982, SDS supports over 25 products for security, encryption, data compression, and network monitoring. We're pleased to be presenting today's webcast with our partner SysperTec, whom we have various product offerings in the Virtel Web Suite. You can find out more about that at www.sdsusa.com. Well, let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about what you're going to be hearing today. In recent years, users of Java applet-based 3270 terminal emulation started realizing that it was time to migrate to thin client browser-based 3270 terminal emulation to simplify support, reduce cost, and support new client device technologies. But before deciding on your next 3270 terminal emulation solution, you should realize that there are two types of thin architecture browser-based 3270 terminal emulation architectures, and that the unique simplicity of Virtel's two-tier architecture remains a key differentiator when compared to the three-tier architecture of its competitors. In the presentation, Patrick Fournier from SysperTec will discuss the benefits of thin client browser-based 3270 terminal emulators over traditional Java applet-based 3270 terminal emulators. He'll discuss the benefits of two-tier over three-tier architecture for thin client browser-based 3270 terminal emulators, and he'll provide an overview of Virtel Web Access, which is both a thin client browser-based and a two-tier 3270 terminal emulator. Patrick Fournier from SysperTec has an extensive background in enterprise modernization services. He currently serves as a solution architect for the Virtel Web Suite, which is published by SysperTec. Following Patrick, John Bakioki from SysperTec will briefly demonstrate Virtel Web Access before we answer any of your questions. John Bakioki is a senior product support engineer, and John has been in the mainframe and system software industry since 1977. His main focus is extending legacy applications by providing web access, modernization, and integration solutions that leverage these applications. Following Patrick and John, we'll have our Q&A session. So it's my pleasure to hand the presentation over to Patrick Fournier. Patrick?
Thank you, Yvonne. My name is Patrick Fournier. I am a Virtel solution architect with SysperTec. Today I'm going to discuss different types of 3270 terminal emulation architecture. First, the thin versus thick client architecture, and then two versus three-tier architecture. And I will finish with an overview of our product, Virtel Web Access, which is both a thin client and a two-tier architecture. So let's start first with thin versus thick client. With thick client architecture, the 3270 terminal emulation facility exchanges 3270 data with the client devices through Telnet 3270 connections. That data is converted by a Java applet that runs on the client device into a 3270 screen. The Java client applet runs in a Java virtual machine, itself running under Windows or Linux. So that's a thick client architecture. With a thin client architecture, the 3270 terminal emulation facility exchanges HTML5 JavaScript code with the client device, and the 3270 data is inside that code. And that's done through an HTTP or HTTPS connection. On the client device, the web browser of that device renders the HTML5 JavaScript code into a web page which has 3270 terminal emulation layout, presentation, and ergonomics. Any web browser could do that HTML5 JavaScript code rendering, and that web browser could run in any OS. The first key benefit of a thin client architecture is that it supports any client technology, whether your users want to use PC workstation, Mac workstation, laptops, notebooks, tablets, smartphones, regardless of the operating system that they use or the web browsers that they use, the solution will work. So that is very convenient if you're in a BYOD environment and your users start deploying any client device they want. You don't have to worry about the solution working, it will work. As for the solution's lifespan, you're guaranteed that the solution will work as long as web browser can render HTML JavaScript code, which, well, for the foreseeable future, that's the way a web browser works. Another key benefit of a thin client architecture is that it makes the installation, administration, and support of the solution much simpler because it's all centralized and you don't have to install, administer, or support anything on distributed and remote clients. No Java components, no applets. As to the deployment, it couldn't be simpler. All you have to do is to point your web browser to an installation-defined URL and port, and you will reach the solution's logon menu. So by simplifying the support and the administration, it frees time for the support team who can focus on more creative tasks. Also, it makes it very easy to deploy a virtual device infrastructure initiative because now the 3270 application looks and are treated as if they were a cloud application. They're accessed via a web browser. Another key benefit of a thin client architecture is the connections which are SSL encrypted and therefore compliant with the latest FIPS level, today 142. With an SSL encrypted HTTPS connection, you don't need a VPN. You can have one if you want, but the VPN will essentially encrypt data that is already encrypted. Also, you don't have any exposed components sitting on the clients. No Java components, no client applets, and in the case of Virtel, even the macro can stay on the host instead of on the client devices where they could be attacked. Another key benefit of the thin client architecture is that it makes it much easier to merge a 3270 screen inside the GUI of a web application, because now the 3270 screen is actually HTML5 JavaScript code, and it's totally consistent with the HTML5 JavaScript code of your GUI. We've done that for clients where, for example, the 3270 screen is rendered inside an iframe inside the GUI of the web application. And then if you want, you can synchronize those two interfaces via some selected fields, for example, an account number, where if you're in the green screen as a user and modify and jump from an account to another, the GUI behind the scene will also jump from an account to the other and vice versa, so that both interfaces are always in sync. So you can do something like that with a thin client solution and a Java applet, but you will need a browser Java plugin. And as you know, modern web browser don't authorize Java plugins any longer, so you're preventing from deploying Edge, Chrome, Firefox, and so forth, and you're stuck with Internet Explorer, who is the only web browser that will still work with Java plugins. So let's compare now the 2 and 3-tier architecture for thin client browser-based 3270 terminal emulators. And starting with 3-tier architecture, all thin client browser-based 3270 terminal emulators, except our own Virtel, use this 3-tier architecture, where a TN3270 server runs as a starter task in a ZOS or ZVSC LPAR. It connects via a Telnet 3270 connection with a 3270 terminal emulation product, which runs on a middle tier server, typically a Windows or Linux server. And then the 3270 terminal emulation product connects via an HTTPS connection with the client device and the web browser of the client device. Virtel is different in the sense that it's a 2-tier architecture. There is no middle tier server with Virtel. It's much simpler. Virtel runs as a starter task in a ZOS or ZVSC LPAR, and it connects with the client and the client web browser via an end-to-end HTTPS connection. Note that in the case of a 3-tier solution with a middle tier server, that middle tier server most of the time will be virtualized, so it actually runs in a mainframe LPAR. Now on to the internals of Virtel. At the core, Virtel is a protocol conversion engine between SNA data and connection and web data and connection. With a 3270 terminal emulator, the connection is HTTPS, but Virtel can be fitted with SMTP, MQ, and other custom IP servers for different web enabling applications. The scenarios in Virtel control the business logic of the web enabling application, and the templates, which are HTML JavaScript templates, control the presentation and layout. They determine what the product coming off Virtel and sent to the web will look like. Now with a product running on the mainframe in a ZOS LPAR, the first question that comes to mind is it going to increase my ZOS cost? And the answer is no, because the footprint of Virtel is just about the same as the footprint of the TN3270 server that it replaces. We benchmarked it to make sure. Virtel consumes a little bit more, about 1,000 to 5,000 of the MSU cap, so 0.1 to 0.5% of the MSU cap more than the TN3270 server. So that's just about neglectable. And if you have any doubt, you can run your Virtel starter task in a different LPAR, an LPAR that is not too busy, because it works across LPARs and across Sysplex. So how come? It's because Virtel really doesn't have to do much on the host. It just inserts 3270 data into a web page template, and then it serves that page to the browser via the HTTP server. The smarts of the 3270 terminal emulation, they're in the HTML JavaScript code of that page, and that's true with both 2 and 3-tier solutions. So that code runs in the web browser on the client device, not on the host. Now, with a 3-tier solution, you should consider that you have the additional footprint of the Windows or Linux LPAR in which that 3270 terminal emulation product runs. It's not as costly as a ZOS LPAR, but you have to pay for it no matter what. When it comes to performances and response times, Virtel, being a 2-tier solution, will have better performances and shorter response times than any 3-tier solution. This is because Virtel doesn't have that middle tier server sitting between the ZOS LPAR and the client device. Virtel is coded in a high-level assembler and it has similar performances as the TN3270 server it replaces. But with a two-tier solution, you have only one protocol conversion from SNA to HTTPS, whereas with a three-tier solution, you have first a protocol conversion from SNA to Telnet, and then another protocol conversion from Telnet to HTTP, and those protocol conversion cost time. Also, the 3270 terminal emulation products that are used with three-tier solution, they're typically coded in Java, and Java is not the best language for response times. A two-tier solution like Virtel is much simpler to install, administer, and support than a three-tier solution. This is because with Virtel you do not have a TN3270 server, as well as you do not have all those components of your middle tier server, the LPAR, the Windows or Linux system, the Java machine or Node.js, and the 3270 terminal emulation product itself. So with a three-tier solution, you have multiple components to install, administer, and support, multiple support teams, and multiple vendors. Whereas with Virtel, it's one product, so one vendor, which is installed, administered, and supported by one team, the ZOS technical support team, and the configuration menus of Virtel allow you in one place to adapt the product configuration to your needs. A two-tier solution like Virtel is also stronger and easier to debug than a three-tier solution. This is because with Virtel, it's all happens in one place. So that's one solution component, one potential point of failure, one skill set required if you want to analyze and understand the situation, and one support team, the ZOS technical support team, to understand and debug a situation if there is one. Whereas with a three-tier solution, you have multiple solution components that creates multiple potential points of failure, and you will need multiple skill sets and multiple support teams to debug a situation if one arises. Now you can integrate with a third-party access control systems such as SSO, LDAP, multi-factor authentication, SAML, U2F, whether you're a three-tier or a two-tier architecture. But being a two-tier architecture like Virtel makes it a bit easier because you're running in a ZOS LPAR next to RACF to negotiate pass tickets and next to SMF to create access audit trail records. Also, the internal architecture of Virtel allows developing and deploying custom filters. For example, to do some custom data filtering, some selective encryption. Let's say you need some field to be encrypted and other field to not be encrypted. Access control and dispatching, custom access control and dispatching. All of this done within Virtel, which means within the ZOS LPAR before you even get outside of the ZOS LPAR. Virtel comes with a integrated application selection menu, which essentially is an integrated multi-session manager. Of course, you can set up Virtel to not use that facility, but this is a default. Essentially, what it does is at logon, it generates a personalized application selection menu based on the user's credential as identified by RACF. All the applications that the user is authorized to access are listed and none others. This allows the user to open as many concurrent sessions as they want via different browser tabs or different browser windows. and those sessions can be open with application running in one LPAR or in another LPAR or in another system, as Virtel supports sysplex configurations. It is a little bit more complicated with a three-tier solution because you have to either use a VTAM logon table or multiple telnet definitions, which mean that you would be using multiple telnet 3270 connection, whereas Virtel was only using one HTTPS connection, or, as is most often the case, a third-party session manager, a product sitting between VTAM and the TN3270 server, but then you have to license and support that product. With a two-tier solution like Virtel, there is only one connection between the host and the client, and that's an end-to-end HTTP connection. That connection is SSL encrypted in the case of Virtel with the IBM AT-TLS facility, which, being an IBM facility, guarantees that the connection will be compliant with the latest FIPS level in the future. With a three-tier solution, it's a bit more complicated because now you have two different types of connections. Between the middle-tier server and the client device, you have an HTTP connection which will have to be encrypted, and you need to make sure that the encryption engine will guarantee compliance with the latest FIPS level today and in the future. And then on the TN3270 server side, you have a Telnet 3270 connection, which means that if by any chance your middle tier server is not virtualized, is not on the mainframe, you will need to protect that connection with a VPN to encrypt the data, and the VPN will be one more third-party product that will need to be licensed and supported. There is a very significant difference between Virtel and any other 3270 terminal emulator when it comes to macros. Traditionally, macros have been created and managed by users with no oversight from the IT community. They're stored on the client devices, so there is no inventory. From an IT point of view, there is no sharing, lots of duplication, no security audit. Those are application extensions which are quite valuable because they add productivity to the access to the application, but they are not owned or controlled by IT or application support staff. And we think that this is wrong. With Virtel, you can do the same. You can have local storage and management of your macros by the users if that's what you really want to do. But you also have an option which we prefer, to have the administrator of Virtel, the Virtel administrator, make that the macro be stored in a centralized repository. To the end user, is totally transparent. They don't understand that. But then the macros can be made global, where anybody can use that macro. A group macro, where anybody belonging to that group can use that macro. Or a user level, where it's a personal macro for a given user. Now you can have a consistent and complete inventory of your macros. You can share them rather than duplicate them, and you can have a security audit, and the administrator can deny some macros. For example, a macro with an encrypted logon credential, user ID and password, as we've seen, and you've probably seen yourself, or a macro that would activate tens of thousands of CICS transactions from an Excel spreadsheet. These kind of macros are very dangerous to the host assets, and if you, as an administrator, force the macros to be in a centralized repository, you can audit them and deny those macros that you think create an exposure for the host asset. So Virtel is priced very competitively compared to any other 3270 terminal emulator. But for a complete and consistent cost comparison, you cannot limit yourself to comparing the software licensing and support costs for the 3270 terminal emulation product. You need to also take into account all the extra components of the three-tier solution. So you need to take into account the software licensing and support cost for the TN3270 server, the telnet connection, the Java or Node machine, the Windows or Linux operating system, and the LPAR in which you would virtualize your middle tier server. So those are the components of the cost comparison that you need to take into account. Now, where Virtel differs from other 3270 terminal emulator, and I don't suggest that this is due to the two-tier architecture, but more to the internal architecture of Virtel, it's the very high flexibility which allows for modernization path, where you're using the 3270 screen user interface of your application, and you're serving the screens as web pages with 3270 terminal emulation, presentation layout, and ergonomics. But then using an IDE called Studio, you can develop your own business logic for that for this user interface, and using Screen Redesigner, Virtel Screen Redesigner, you can develop your own templates. And now, instead of serving traditional green screen, now you can be serving GUIs with all the widgets, selection list and graphical calendar and so forth, Ajax based features, new features to your user interface. Or you can interface with a web application via web and message services. So this modernization path for your legacy 3270 application is fairly simple with Virtel due to this flexibility. And you can, once you're in GUIs or web or message services, you can replace the screen interface with Comaria or a CICS channel interface, and eventually eliminate the screens, keep the business logic of your transaction inside the transaction, but let Virtel provide the GUI presentation or the web or message service interface to web applications. Note that Virtel Web Access is the most mature of the thin client browser-based 3270 terminal emulator. It was designed in the early 2000s. Its first industrial strength deployment was at Peugeot Citroën, the car maker. It was in 2003, and it was deployed to 400,000 users in 150 countries worldwide. So it has been in production in different installations for over 15 years now, as hundreds of references, whereas the three-tier thin client solutions that are becoming available have been announced only in the past 1 to 3 years by vendors of Java applet solutions after the demise of the Java applet technology. So their customers are now forced to migrate to a new thin client solution, whereas Virtel customers don't have to migrate anywhere else. Their technology will support them for years to come. So the Virtel designer had it right all along since the early 2000s with a solution that is based on thin client browser-based architecture and two-tier architecture, which has no equivalent to this date. Now, let's summarize the benefits that you get from migrating from a Java applet-based 3270 terminal emulator to a thin client browser-based two-tier solution like Virtel. you will get about 3/4, and that's my own personal estimate, okay? But you will get about 3/4 of your benefits from the thin client aspect of the solution, because it brings a simpler administration and support, improved security, support of BYOD, VDI, and desktop as a service type initiatives. You will eliminate the reliance on Java applets. You will be able to easily integrate with the GUIs of your web applications, and in the end you will lower your TCO. But you still get what I assess as being 25% of benefits from the two-tier aspect of the solution, where it again makes the administration and support even simpler. It's more robust and easier to debug. It's more flexible, more evolutive, more modernization capabilities. It allows to integrate, it comes with an integrated multi-session management. There is no need for VPN. You can store and manage your macros on the host. So all of this will further lower your TCO. So now we're going to turn our attention to Virtel Web Access, which is our own thin client two-tier 3270 terminal emulator. Virtel Web Access is the base configuration of our Virtel Web Suite. Additional configuration include Virtel Web Modernization, which replaces the screen user interface with modern GUIs, and Virtel Web Integration, which serves the applications as web or message services. So Virtel Web Access serves 3270 screens, such as those of CSES, IMS, and TSO, as HTML5 JavaScript web pages with 3270 emulation, presentation, layout, and ergonomics to thin client straight off the mainframe and without middle-tier servers. Typically, Virtel Web Access replaces client-based TN3270 emulators. With Virtel, the client app, the applet, is replaced by a combination of the plugin-free web browser and the web page that Virtel serves to that web browser. So Virtel runs on the host, where it converts the 3270 application screens into HTML JavaScript web pages, and it serves those web pages to the client device, where it can be rendered by any web browser running on any web-enabled device. As discussed earlier, this type of solution works instantly with any web client available today or tomorrow. The deployment couldn't be simpler. There is nothing to install on the client devices, and there are no middle-tier servers. You simply ask your users to point their web browser to an installation-defined URL and port. The administration and support are also greatly simplified, because there are no client app, no middle-tier server, no Java components, and the administration and support are 100% host-based. Because there are no middle-tier server and no Java, you don't have any of the issues typically associated with middle-tier servers or with Java components. Once authenticated, users are served by default an application selection menu, which is their own personal application selection menu. On it, they see only those applications that they're authorized to access, and a green light if the application is up and running, a red light if the application is not available. To combine with the multi-tab capability of a web browser, and actually also with the possibility of running multiple web browser instances, this works as a simple multi-session manager. So some users, actually quite a number of users, have simply dropped their multi-session manager. Here is a sample of a web page that looks and works as a green screen. The application code are the native 3270 application code. Everything looks exactly as a green screen. The navigation is still tab and PFK as on your native 3270 application. And there is a toolbar at the top with a virtual keyboard, a copy, cut and paste tool, a screenshot and delete the screenshot tool, settings for all the parameters for the presentation and look of your green screen, a macro recording and replay, access to documentation, and a disconnect button. So how does it work? Well, 3270 application will interface with their users via legacy 3270 screens. Those screens are sent to the user via an SNA connection and through VTerm. Virtel runs as a starter task on the ZOS or ZVSC system, and it includes a VTerm relay. That VTerm relay has a smarts to communicate with VTerm, and VTerm thinks that it's talking to a virtual terminal when in fact it's talking to Virtel. At the core of Virtel is a protocol converter between host and web technologies, and also within Virtel is an IP server, and we have several IP servers. With 3270 terminal emulation, it's an HTTP server, and it manages the connection with the client device. At runtime, the 3270 data coming off the application is inserted into templates to generate a web page, which is HTML JavaScript web page. That web page can be rendered by any web browser running on any device. So that's Virtel Web Access. But with a custom development of your own scenario and a custom development of your own template, you can use the same technology to convert your green screen into modern GUI pages. So that users think they're working on a web application, but actually they're working on your CICS or IMS application. And also, I don't have a slide here to illustrate, I don't have a diagram to illustrate. With, again, custom scenario development and custom template development, instead of a GUI or 3270 terminal emulation page, you could have web or message services. And the connection then would be an SMTP type connection or an MQ connection. Now we're going to review a few customer stories, starting with Peugeot Citroën, the car manufacturer. Back in 2003, they decided to eliminate a costly private SNA network that was used to access their main IMS application and database. They deployed Virtel to 400,000 users in 150 countries worldwide, and they went with a thin client browser-based solution because deploying Java applets would have been horrific. They were in a BYOD type of situation where they didn't control the 400,000 devices, client devices, used by their users. So the support requirement and the TCO would have been horrendous if they had gone with Java applets. Today they support 16,000 concurrent users per product instance, and they take advantage of a Virtel integrated facility which automatically behind the scene converts the double byte character set and Unicode used by terminals, the type of terminals you have in Russia, Japan, China, and convert that to the European character set that they use in their IMS database. Now on to Crédit Agricole, which is, I believe, a pretty good sized bank. I think they're number 16 or 17 in the world. They access CICS with Virtel since 2005. they eliminated at the time their TN3270 Java applets, and that was to reduce their support requirements. But they since then have not stayed very long with the green screen. They use Virtel to create a GUI that replaces the screens. And initially, the GUI was fairly simple with drop-down list, graphical calendar, checkboxes, and so on. And then later on, they went in a second phase of modernization where they added Ajax-based technology to do auto-suggest, auto-complete, PDF generation, emails. And in the third and final phase, they decided to start modifying the CICS application so that they took out the 3270 screens and they replaced them with ComArea. And of course, Virtel can interface with ComArea instead of the 3270 screen. And this way, they are not running anymore through the CICS presentation layers. PNV Assurance is a European insurer based in Belgium, and they are using Virtel since 2010. They used to force their independent agents, the folks who sell their products and services, to lease dedicated PCs. Those PCs were taking space on the desktops of the agents, and the agents hated both having to lease the PCs and having wasted desktop space. Also, this being Europe, they wanted to use Apple products rather than traditional Windows PCs. So the main justification for migrating to Virtel in this case was to eliminate those dedicated PCs and satisfy the agents. In the process, they reduced their support requirements and lowered their TCO, and they were able to eliminate their VPN because of the SSL encrypted HTTPS connections. And we finish with Fragility. They manage the largest commercial vehicle fleet in Europe with 58,000 vehicles, 180 agencies, 15 countries. In 2017, they completed a very unique virtual device infrastructure initiative where they replaced 1,500 PCs with superlight Chrome devices. The only software installed on those Chrome devices are the Chrome OS, the Chrome browser, the Chrome remote desktop for remote support of those devices, an extension for Salesforce, which is their CRM, and a Citrix receiver applet to access their legacy Office Suite application and data, which are now sitting in the Citrix cloud. They also use the Chrome browser to access their documentation, which is YouTube videos, and their new Office Suite, which is the Google Office Suite. And finally, they use Chrome to access the 3270 application, whether via green screens or via GUIs. And you could say that those applications now are 3270 application as a service, because like the Office Suite, they're accessed via the Chrome browser in a cloud, which happens to be the mainframe cloud. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your interest, and I will now hand over to John Bakierke for a brief demonstration.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm about to give you a brief demonstration of Virtel Web Access. We're going to show you how the 3270 screens render on a web page, and to show you that you have all of the functionality that you would have with a standard TN3270 emulation. And then I'm going to give you a brief overview of our administrative capabilities, which will allow a mainframe system programmer to control all of the Virtel customizations and settings from one place on the mainframe, thus preventing the need for that same type of configuration across a number of workstations and or a server environment. So let me take a look at other applications. That's going to tell me to sign on, which I'm going to do, and this is my mainframe credentials. And when I do that, I'm presented with an application menu. Now, you may have seen something similar to this within the presentation, where we have a number of applications that are available as based on having the green light in front. And also our IMS application is not up and running right now, so that's not available, and it's been shown by the red light. But let's just take a look at TSO. And again, I'm going to have to sign in. Be aware that this multiple sign-in is not necessary. It can be configured so that you only have to sign in once. And as you can see, we're signing into TSO, and if I type in ISPF here, we're going to get to the standard ISPF main menu, and I'll take you to just an edit session where we're going to go in and look at a member called Arbo Copy. And again, you can see we have all the capabilities of a standard 3270 session. The cursor is shown up here. We have the different PF key capabilities, including the capability to actually click on, for example, down or up, and be able to page back and forth within a document, although you can certainly use the standard PF keys for that. We also have the capability here to do a copy and paste, either by just copying this and clicking copy, and then coming over here and clicking paste. Okay, or we can also do a copy from, say, our documentation. This is a PDF document, where right here I'm going to highlight that and do a copy, and then come back to our session, put my cursor here, and do a paste, like so. And you can use the standard Microsoft keys like Control-C and Control-V to do the same copy and paste. We also have a toolbar which we provide a copy capability to replace what you have on your clipboard, although that's not the same as doing a copy and paste down here. We have the capabilities to do files, receives, and sends to and from TSO. We have the capability to capture your screen and to clear it. We have the capability to record keystroke macros and then play those macros. And these can be stored either locally on your PC, or they can be stored on the mainframe and managed by your system administrator. We also have a settings parameter, or button I should say, where we give you the capability to do things like change the size of your window, change the way the cursor looks, things like key mappings, where you can change many of the standard keys to fit your own requirements. We have the capabilities, for example, to display hotspots or not. I can turn that off and these things will go away. And some other types of customization that the users can do for their own settings, or they can be done on a global level for all users. And we have the capability to save those settings locally and then import them again, so that if for some reason you lose all of your browser settings and you want to get them back again, you can do so very easily. Okay. So, what I'd like to do now is to PF3 my way back out. And log off. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to our administrative panel capabilities by just clicking here. And this is just a set of panels that we provide as part of the Virtel started task, which enables you to configure your system to meet your own internal specifications. We can do things like, for example, if I press an F1 here and then take a look at this by putting my cursor there and hitting F12, we can do things like change the port number of the TCP line that you're communicating to Virtel with. We can do things like set a timeout action. We can do things like set the number of times you can retry accessing through Virtel. All of this immediately configurable and actionable by the systems programmer and changeable on the fly. We can also do things like, for example, define your terminals to Virtel, where we associate Virtel's internal terminal names with the terminals that you have defined to VTAM. So if I press 2 here, for example, and go down to this line and press at PF12 for details, we can see this is our terminal name. This is the name that the VTAM knows it by, and then we say basically you can have a terminal with this starting at 000, repeating 80 times. So we've just defined 80 terminals from RCT-VT000 to RCT-VT079. And this name, again, it equates to the name on VTAM. Finally, we can also define to Virtel things we call entry points. And this is basically just a list of all of the started tasks that you can access with Virtel. So for example, for a CICS, TSO, TSO5, which is a Model 5 TSO, I'm going to page down. And we can also see, for example, a session manager if you have it. And let's just take a look for a sample at TSO, or even better, a CICS. And when I take a look at it, you can define to it things like the CICS Apple ID, so we know what to communicate with. We know it's a VTAM application. We know we're going to use this set of terminals with it. We know that you can start it from the application menu, which you just saw. And we know that we're using basic security with it, which means that we are, in fact, utilizing the RACF security or ACF2 or top secret, whatever you have, in order to access this application. So there's no additional security that you need to define. We also here give you the capability to do what we call, with TLS, to utilize the IBM's ATTLS security package in order to do HTTPS security. Okay. So I'm going to just clear out of this. And that concludes our demonstration of Virtel. I realize this has been quite a brief demonstration, but it should give you an idea of the types of capabilities and the types of powerful tools that you have with a Virtel installation. I'd now like to pass the baton back to Yvonne Wheaton. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, for the demo. We're going to go ahead and go into the Q&A, and this is Yvonne Wheaton again. We have a few questions we can cover today. First one here is, what if I don't want to use Virtel's application selection menu? Can I reuse my USS tab and or session manager instead? John?
Thank you, Yvonne. The answer to that question is yes. You can define your session manager as an application to Virtel, or you can include your USS tab load library in Virtel's step lib concatenation within the started task and directly access it using Virtel.
Okay, we have a question here with host stored macros. What defines a group macro and how are group members defined? John?
Yes, a group macro is one that can be made available to more than one user. Okay, and what the group is the RACF defined resource, which covers a number of users, and that RACF resource is used by Virtel in its macro management process.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how does Virtel access 3270 applications in a multi-ZOS system environment? John, I think that's you again.
Yeah, there's three ways that Virtel can access 3270 applications in a multi-ZOS system environment. The first way is to install one Virtel product instance on each of the multiple ZOS systems or LPARs. In this instance, it is assumed that the LPARs have no VTAM communication between them. The second way is to use IBM's older sub-area and CDRM SNA technology, which tends to be used when you have VM supporting multiple ZOS instances. And in that case, you could run one LPAR Virtel on one LPAR and then communicate to all of the other LPARs via either CDRM or sub-area. The third way you can do it is to use IBM's VTAM Enterprise Extender and Dynamic Logical Units, otherwise known as DYNLU, and communicate either internally via XCF or the coupling facility or via TCP/IP. And again, in that case, you would only need one instance of Virtel running on an LPAR and then communicating to the other LPARs using those facilities.
Okay, great, thanks. These all look pretty much down your alley here. I have another one here. Does Virtel support definition of terminals that are restricted to accessing a specific application or applications?
The answer to that question is yes. You can, in fact, define associations to existing terminals and use them exactly as they're used in your current application setup. Or you can also restrict terminal access to specific applications within Virtel itself by doing administrative configuration.
Okay, great. Thanks again. Here we do have an installation question here, John. It's what does the installation and tailoring process entail, and how much time does it take?
The installation process takes between 60 and 90 minutes. It involves creation of load libraries and vSAM files, the application of maintenance to the software, creation of our control files, and association of VTAM LU definitions to Virtel. And after that installation, Virtel will be available for use. We then have a tailoring process, and that involves the definition of all of your started tasks to Virtel so that they can be accessed and customization of usage features. And for new customers, we normally schedule a 60 to 90 minute WebEx to assist in that process and also to provide training. And we record those WebExes for your review later.
Okay, terrific. That sounds great. It looks like that's all the time we have for questions today. In the next few days, we'll be providing answers to any of the questions that we did not get to today. We'll be sending out the questions with the answers to our audience along with a link to our presentation. I want to thank Patrick Fournier and John Bakioki again for joining us today for our browser-based 3270 terminal emulation, A Tale of Two Architectures webcast. We thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found something new or thought-provoking to take away from the webcast. And if you have any other questions, you can send us an email at info@sdsusa.com or call us at 1-800-443-6183. Thank you again for joining us today.